You're listening to the OverFunctioning Leadership Podcast, learning leadership concepts through life experience. Hello, friends. Welcome to the OverFunctioning Leadership Podcast version. I am Alex.
I'm John.
And I'm Zach.
And we are glad to have you once again on our 21st episode. At 21 years old, I don't think I did anything special.
I don't think so either.
Zach?
I did something special.
Good, awesome, great. Yeah. Hopefully that's like sliding down a hill.
I firmed up some friendships, you know. Fast friends, you know. Yeah.
Real fast friends. Anyways, so today we're going to be talking about commitment versus maturity. I had this thought has been floating in my brain because of something else, and I'll tell you about that in the fable. But before that, actually our last episode was about nature versus nurture, in which Zach and I had a little debate going back and forth. And Franz here, as in John, was our...
Franz John.
Moderator. I always want to call you mediator, but you did terrible at both things.
I think you actually pushed us to fight more. Came to blows.
Yeah, I was doing my best to muddle the waters.
Mm-hmm.
Muddy the waters.
Muddy.
And if I recall, you did declare a winner.
I did.
Would you remind us of that?
Oh, gosh. He doesn't even remember. I must have won.
Yeah.
I think I won.
If you're listening in, you'll need to listen to that episode.
Yes.
To figure it out. Nature versus nurture, episode 20.
I'm not going to tell you which part I was or which part Zach was, but
yeah,
we were one of.
But you are a biology teacher.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think when you say that, I think you need to say you can trust everything he says because he's a biology teacher.
It actually added so much credibility to your argument that I don't really remember anything I said. I was just in awe.
Yeah, and I think it's the same caveat if, John was like 20 years older and just an old man, and then he could say, I'm an old man, so you can trust everything I say.
Right,
yeah. So that'd be great.
I thought you were going to say 20 years younger with beautiful blonde hair.
Those were the days.
Then I don't believe anything he says. Those were the days. All right, well, we did nature versus nurture. It was a good talk about just leaders overall. Are they, born of nature? Are they just born into being leaders, or are they nurtured into being a good leader? And so we talked about both sides and then brought it all together at the end, hopefully for a coherent idea. I think we did pretty good. And I won.
Yeah, pretty good.
So, it is fable time, so go ahead and slap on some Burt's Bees. It's time for fables. I'm actually going to bring the fable today, and because this is my thought about commitment versus maturity. So I was actually in a membership class it was called Inquiry class for my church that I've started attending. And there was a conversation that took place that it was about commitment and maturity. It wasn't actually, we didn't stay there very long, but overall, since it's a membership class, they're looking for your commitment within the membership class, right? And not looking for, you have to be a certain type of maturity before you can be a member, but we want you to commit, and then we can work things out through that. And so that brings us to this topic, and that's a pretty quick fable, but it really caught me to a tizzy because I'm part of the millennial group, and so is Zach. John, you are in the, I don't remember.
I am 1 year removed from the baby boomers. I missed it by a year.
So you're the what?
I am baby boomer plus one.
So would that be babies boomers?
That would be baby boomerang.
Oh, God, okay.
Return to sender.
Sounds like some awful movie I never want to watch. In fact, I think that's the last movie you did watch on screen.
Right after Apollo 13.
Yeah, Baby Boomerang Return to Sender.
The soundtrack is just wonderful.
I'm thinking this is like a Medea type of movie,
Tyler
or like
Perry.
A Tyler Perry movie.
He plays everyone. Who was the actor of that cast?
The actor of that cast was Franz Klammer. Oh, wait a minute. That was the mediator from the last podcast. Or was that moderator?
Yeah, well, your extensive knowledge of actors and actresses never ceases to...
We're astounded.
Yeah, I'm jaw-dropping. Anyways, so because of this discussion, or like my pastor stated something along the lines of, he thinks that our current millennials, and I'll be guessing younger, but I don't know, but current millennials are spending a lot of time becoming mature because they feel like they have to be mature before they can make a commitment. While maybe in his age, and maybe John, you can speak to this, that in his age they would commit and then they would mature afterwards. And so what do y'all think about that? Where does it bring you? Do you think this is true? Do you think there's any substance to this? Shall we start with the millennial?
Yeah, let's start with the millennial. When I first heard you text this question out, I was very confused and I asked for clarification because I don't know if I immediately draw a connection between maturity and commitment. And I think it's there, but when I first hear the word commitment, I think of back when I went to college. Grove City College was a very small niche group of Grover achievers, right? Get that? Yeah, Grove City.
Zinger.
Grover, over, yeah. So, the overarching mentality and attitude was everyone was adding commitments to their plate very easily without thought, and everyone had too much to do. It was almost an excuse, and there was tons of commitments that people had made that they weren't willing to give up. They were very committed to this. I'm not sure I would say it was tied to maturity so much as it was tied to the culture of the college.
Yeah, so it sounds like they were Grover functioning.
Exactly.
Oh boy. Would you say, I don't know, I mean, we could just look at stats pretty easily and see that millennials are getting married older.
Yeah.
And do you think the commitment, it depends on what type of commitment it is? The larger the commitment, as in getting married, or I don't know.
Yeah, I made a note here of it seems to me that this might be true, that we are living in a society that's more anxious, and when anxiety is high, there's a notion to cling to safety over risk. And so maybe it's the idea that I'm going to make sure that I'm really mature before I make a commitment.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe there's something to be said for the desire to stick to certainty, which would make commitment after maturity.
So you would say there's an association between commitments made and maturity more so now because it's an anxious society.
Yeah, I think that, if we are going to say that there's a connection between the two of them, I think that people commit, they're less likely to commit when they're unsure of themselves. And if a person's unsure of themselves, that typically means, well, it could mean that it's riskier. And so it's harder for me to be certain the more risk I feel or the more worry I feel.
My question would be, is this a problem?
For
who?
I mean, let's just go with, I don't know, let's just start with the millennial who believes they have to be more mature to make a commitment. Then we can go out from there.
How do you measure maturity? I mean,
That's a great question.
For me, myself, I don't, if I had to measure my own maturity, I don't know that I could do a very good job it would be hard to quantify that.
I almost used commitment to quantify maturity when I approached this, because I was looking at this and trying to define what maturity's relationship to commitment was, and I kept tying it back to differentiation, and that's sort of like an opaque term that we're using to mean so many different things. So I tried to narrow that down. I came to something along the lines of commitment might be measured by the intensity of the opposition or inconvenience required to abandon promised duties, beliefs, or statuses. Can we repeat that?
Agreed.
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah. Commitment might be measured. So this is simply as how you can quantify someone's commitment per se. Commitment might be measured by the intensity of opposition or inconvenience required to abandon promised duties, beliefs, or statuses.
Promised. Yeah, because it almost goes against some things.
Yeah, when my first thought when I think of commitment is marriage. And when I think of what that entails is a really, really big promise that you're saying, regardless of the circumstance, this is a promise I'm going to keep. That's big picture what I think of when I think of commitment.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I look at someone's level of commitment, it's what does it take for them to abandon that?
Abandon what?
That promise, their word almost. Now, I know that doesn't entail every type of commitment per se, but that's sort of how I wrap this up.
Well, I clearly think of commitment is the more committed, the more difficult the commitment is, the more sweat you get. And so,
Yeah.
that's part of it's a 1-to-1 ratio. I feel like. So let's just go back to this past Sunday where I committed to my church to be a member.
Mm-hmm.
I did not realize how nervous I was until the night before, and then I went up there and I was you guys know me, extroverted. I can stand in front of a bunch of people and it doesn't matter. But holy cow! It was like all of a sudden knowing that I was committing to these people and to be disciplined by the church and all these different things really brought home this part of me of wow, now this means something. This isn't just I'm not just signing up for whatever. I'm committing to something.
It's more than just a club.
Yes, it is just more than a club. So
that's an interesting thought because you hear those stories about Navy SEAL training, basic training, Army camp. Army camp. I feel like it's a summer camp, but with Army cadets.
What? Did you think of Buster Bluth or what?
I really do. It's just hilarity ensues. He's in a crane picking up other little men. No, but you hear them talk about how difficult their training was, and a large part of that thought process behind that is two-sided. It's one, how they view themselves as someone who can overcome great adversity, but on the other hand, it's so that in 95% of the circumstances they encounter, they will be able to say, I have made it through something more difficult than this. That immediate level of self-assuredness and confidence, which doesn't directly tie to commitment or maturity, but it's I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I do. I see a tie-in with commitment. So you mentioned if someone goes through rigorous training, it builds confidence. They're able to get through certain hurdles, and ultimately, I think challenges, trials, difficulties, in general, increase confidence. And when one's confidence is increased, then they're more willing to say, I'm going to make a commitment and I'm going to figure out the unknowns later, because in my previous practices up to this point, I've done that. I've worked on difficult things. You mentioned training, and I've been able to make it through. And so this commitment is going to be okay because I have past experience where I've made it through trials. I think that's really an important point that you made.
Now, how does that tie into maturity? Because we've talked before where we've talked about how you don't select candidates for the Army based off of maturity, right? But the whole process is meant to forge people into those who are able to keep this commitment, which doesn't necessarily tie to commitment, except in that going into this, if they're viewing it as a commitment, they're saying, I trust that this process and these people involved in this process are going to build me into the sort of person who will be able to stand behind these papers I'm signing, or the American dream, or whatever that might mean.
In the military, the system's different, though.
Yeah.
I think it's very different. It's more machine-like. like you're going to follow these rules. This is the way it's going to be done. And there's not it's not like somebody, I don't know how much autonomy somebody has within the Army.
You don't say to your commanding officer, I appreciate that, sir, but I see it differently.
Yeah, there's not much of that going on. So I don't know, the tie-in there. I think, I wonder if you sign up for a commitment to the military is like, I know that I'm going to be disciplined. There's got to be some part of that,
Yeah. Which builds maturity in a sense, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Being able to exist in that sort of hierarchical structure, where that structure almost compensates for the circumstances that would allow for anxiety to take a hold, right? Rather than reacting to your anxieties, you can respond to the system in such a way that you're just like hands off, like take the wheel.
Maybe I got up early this morning, so my attention span is low. What question are we asking?
So the overall question is, the overthought had to do with commitment versus maturity. And if millennials have a problem with committing because they feel like they need to be mature first.
Okay.
That's the overall question. But then it's eventually, I think we need to travel down the list of, in leadership, how does this connect to leadership? Because that's what this podcast is about, I think. So, as a leader, at some point, is there a point to where you feel like, do you need to become more mature to become a leader? Or can you be a leader without being mature? And maybe we need to swap out the word maturity with self-differentiation. That's where I think we need to head to. I would say that for me, knowing whether somebody's mature, I think in some way there's almost an aura about somebody, and you can kind of figure out their maturity level based off of nonverbals, but also verbals as well. They step in the room. Is the room getting calmer? Is the room getting more crazy? And I think I think we're all pretty good on what's going on with maturity. In a lot of ways, almost instantly, the system can feel that, and the organisms there can be like, oh, somehow I feel that the anxiety went down or the anxiety went up. I can just think about families. If your grandfather comes over or somebody who's the most self-differentiated person in your family comes over, how does that change the whole system where you're at? And so I think there's a way that you can feel that, and I think systems can feel that overall too. So maybe we need to make the shift right now from maturity to self-differentiation. And when it comes to leadership, where does self-differentiation and commitment come in?
Well, before we talk about that, can we sidestep? And I have so many connotations associated with self-differentiation that aren't associated with maturity. So it might be good to distinguish where they converge and where they separate. Because I think convictions play a large part in people being self-differentiated. I don't look at someone and, knowing what I know, say, you're self-differentiated, unless I know that you're standing behind some sort of convictions or beliefs that guide you in everyday life. Whereas there are people who walk in the room and the way that your example, someone who walks in the room and either raises or lowers the anxiety, if that's maturity, it's directly related to anxiety levels. So I'm trying to distinguish what should I separate from maturity as compared to self-differentiation.
Self-differentiation is connected to anxiety, though, right? I mean, the whole
inherently.
basis of Bowen family system theory is going to be connected to anxiety. So that's, I don't know.
If we think about self-differentiation and the two aspects of it, the internal component is being able to separate thinking and feeling. When anxiety is lower, it's easier to do that. When anxiety is higher, it's harder to do that. And then the second component of self-differentiation is the external component, which is individuality and togetherness. And so when anxiety is high, I can strive towards individuality, or I said it differently, I maybe move towards individuality or cutoff. Or when anxiety gets high in the external component, it's togetherness, and I kind of get fused with people. The word maturity, I think it's easy to have pretend maturity, to have someone that looks mature because they're trying to cultivate an image of maturity. But I think when anxiety gets higher, how that person responds to that, I think gives a key of whether it's real maturity, and that would be self-differentiation, or whether it's just borrowed or pretend maturity.
Do you think people get positions of leadership because of their maturity and not their self-differentiation?
I think they get, for several reasons. I think degrees, training, years of experience. I think those are I think politics and who you know is part of it too.
I'm just wondering if that's connected to that false maturity that you're talking about. Like I'm just thinking of even students, and I do student council, and so I have students who vote for kids on their class president and vice president, and it's almost like, I don't know if this would be true or not, but okay, this kid dresses really nice and is always quieter and is real nice with people. Got to be mature. You know what I mean? It's almost like you can paint that on, but really underneath they might not have any idea what's going on a self-differentiation end. So, and I mean, even the things you said, they have this many years of service, but that doesn't mean really a whole lot of anything at times. Okay, I've been doing this for, however many years, but it doesn't mean you've been doing it right either, just because you've been doing it. So,
I'm also like, the word wisdom struck a chord with me. It's easier, I would say, to fake wisdom through your or other people's experience. And I think people view you as mature when you seem to be a wise person in a variety of situations, when you're able to provide guidance and direction, typically without increasing anxiety.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's truth to that, where someone says, well, they give great advice, and so that's maturity. But what we can't see is how one operates in the midst of high anxiety. I think that really shows if a person is, what we use the term, self-differentiated or not.
And I would say that giving advice doesn't necessarily mean that you're mature.
It's easy to tell people what to do.
Yeah, it's really easy. It's a lot harder to try to just let them figure it out themselves and ask them hard questions to do that.
Yeah, sometimes, we work with students, and sometimes people will look at leaders or mature people as people who talk a lot, always have opinions, always willing to say something, and they're like, wow, they're mature, they've thought through things. And I don't know that the number of words said and maturity are correlated in any way.
I'm just thinking of people with a loud voice or a big stick. I don't know if you guys can think of anyone currently who, just have a very loud booming voice and is in a leadership position because of their loud booming voice.
Theodore Roosevelt, my favorite president.
Yeah, exactly.
Speak softly and carry a big stick. Oh, wait a minute. Speak loudly. Never mind.
It's kind of like the guy we were at the lunch. We were at Diamond Deli the other day, and a guy was standing behind me, and he must have had the loudest, lowest booming voice I think I've ever experienced. He was right now. I could not hear what Zach was saying to me. He was a foot away from my face.
If you understand how subwoofers work, right, the lowness of sound is so physical, it's absorbed by the things around it. So you need a lot of bass at concerts because people in front, between you and the speakers, are actually absorbing it. I could not hear this man's voice through Alex. It was so low. He was literally absorbing the vibrations. I saw his hair just shaking.
And I committed to everything he wanted me to do, even though he didn't ask me. I now work at Don Joseph. I'm selling cars with him.
You did get
I bought a car.
You did get quieter and more submissive. I did notice that.
Okay, so guys, let's try to get back to this a little bit. I think Zach, you have something to share.
Yeah. So jumping back in, tying this back. When I processed this earlier, and I said commitment might be measured by intensity of opposition or inconvenience that's required to abandon promised duties, beliefs, or statuses. I think that directly ties to leadership and self-differentiation in the sense that what circumstances would require you to abandon or to separate yourself, to remove your influence to a situation? What would be required such that you have to step away from a conviction? And conviction is so tied to self-differentiation, where you're acting because of what you believe.
So when you say you're acting based on what you believe, and then you said stepping away from a commitment. So here's my question: is maturity? Would an example of maturity be someone stepping away from a commitment?
Yeah, I could see that in the sense that it would be a mature decision to step away from a commitment because you cannot remain true to your convictions if you were to continue in the commitment.
So in a family where a child converted to a different faith and the parent said, in our family we are this, and the person abandons the commitment, is that maturity?
My question was, would that be their commitment? It sounds like the family commitment, but not necessarily the individual commitment.
So is it an individual decision based on conviction, or is it group pressure that's causing me to abandon the commitment? I think there are two different ways to look at that, whether one is a self-differentiated move saying, I'm going to abandon this commitment because it's just the best thing for me at this point,
Yes.
versus the group pressure is getting to me and I've decided to bail.
I got a group think this out, and we're all going together. We're all jumping.
Let me throw some statistics at you
Oh, great.
from some research I did, and I was processing through that very same question. How many people have thoughtfully considered to choose a commitment or abandon it? And in my head, two big commitments: marriage. What else? Religion. Right?
Yeah.
And so I go to the Pew Research Foundation, which I think is pretty reputable. And I was looking, I just, did a Google search, and Islam came up. And I thought this was pretty interesting in that here are some common reasons for leaving Islam. The big sections are issues with the religion in general, issues with Islam, preference for other religions or spirituality, personal growth, family reasons, or other unclear. But breaking one of those down, so 26% of the people who are of this group that left, 12% of them don't like organized religion / don't believe in religion.
Okay.
8% don't believe in God, and 6% are not religious or not practicing or not drifted away.
Like, why the heck are you there?
Yeah.
That's the
And
question
so,
I'm
like,
asking, yeah.
in that, I can imagine situations in which you would leave Islam for legitimate reasons. You don't believe in God, and you've thoughtfully considered why you don't believe in God. Or other, I don't like organized religion. That seems sort of not thoughtfully considered to me. And I'm not saying that. That's just, I can imagine a situation. I have friends who have been in that situation where it's just a feeling. It's not something that they'll stick to, and they flip-flop, over the years, but they just don't like something, and that influences their decision.
So you said, I heard the word feeling in there. So is commitment based off feeling, or is commitment based off logic and a well thought through? I mean, can it be a little bit of both? But when you said feeling, I'm like, is there what ifs? Is there another outsider that's doing something here? I don't know.
Yeah. And I also, just not to directly answer your question, but to throw out another one, how often are we abandoning something that we're holding to, conviction, because of feelings, in replace of nothing, right? We're filling it with nothing, or do we fill it with something else? Another statistic I came across was a majority of those who converted to Islam came from a Christian background, and half of all converts to Islam identified as Protestant before converting. I thought that was a fascinating statistic. These were people who traded one belief system for another, and I have to imagine that wasn't a consideration, that wasn't lightly made.
Yeah.
And because my first question, and it relates to that, was for a person that leaves the Islamic faith, are they born Muslim? Meaning, I know, in other words, was there an expectation of following the Islamic faith from birth versus I am Christian and I've left the Christian faith and become a Muslim, which I see as two different things. Do you all see it that way?
Yeah. Like, it's, yeah.
And I actually have some of those right here, 24 preferred the beliefs, teachings of Islam, finding more meaning in Islam. This isn't just the Christian audience. This is just everyone who they polled that converted to Islam. 21% read the religious text and studied Islam. 10% wanted to belong to a community. 9% married into it or had a relationship with someone in there. 9% were introduced by a friend or following a public leader. 8% were family. 8% were searching for answers, exploring personal spirituality, and you go down from there.
So a little bit of both. It sounded like there was some of those were like, I just want to be part of a community, and
Just because
I married into it or something like that. But then some of those, there was a higher percentage though that said that I think you said 15% like looked into the text and agreed with the text that was there.
And I know I'm drowning us in statistics. This will be the last one. I have plenty more, but I thought this was interesting. How much does the community surrounding you influence that religious belief? And so jumping over to Christianity, completely different study. This was studying how 1 in 5 are in the U.S. 1 in 5 are raised with mixed religious backgrounds. That is, their parents are of different religious backgrounds, and 79% of the people polled were raised in a single religious background. 66% by 2 parents and 14 by 1, and then 21%, which is the group that was primarily being polled, were raised by 2 people with different religions. And I thought that was interesting in that as you go down this study, you see that very often emphasizing the relationship of the mother was more likely to have imparted religious belief on the child than the father when you mince the numbers. And also, there's a relatively equal chance if you're raised by one unaffiliated parent and a religious parent. It's a 50-50 chance.
Of what?
Of picking a religion.
Interesting.
Which I thought was fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, this would be an interesting podcast going forward about, so why am I a Christian? Well, both my parents were, so maybe it was deterministic. Maybe I'm just following what they did. If they were both Muslim, then what?
Yeah.
That's an interesting question.
Yeah, it's almost like part of our nature versus nurture debate, which you can listen to.
We all know you won, Alex.
Yes, we all know.
As the biologist.
Thank you. Yes, you can trust me. So, wrapping back around to our commitment maturity discussion, and I'm trying to think through, Zach, all the stuff that you gave to us. So, what can you wrap around with that when it comes to commitment in this whole discussion?
My primary conclusion when I was reading through this was looking at the scenarios in which people abandoned that which was the rock. In most cases, I imagine that would be the family, right? Taking what identifies you as homogenous to them and separating how that really works. And you look at a lot of those statistics, and it was interesting to see that I found the reasons that people, looking at the Islam study, the reasons that people became Islamic, that is to say, they left something else and chose to hold to those beliefs, seemed a lot more credible to me in large as compared to those who left Islam. Now, I don't know the stories, I don't know why, but I can more identify with the hard rational logic. I can create a persuasive paper on why you can join a religion based off of the lists, using the list as an outline of why they joined as compared to why they left.
So the commitment.
And so based off that, I would say that it seems as if you abandon commitments more easily that you were born into that aren't really yours as compared to taking up new mantles and new commitments.
Okay, because the new commitments would be based off of your
maturity, self-differentiation. It seems as if there's harder reasons to take up something that you're personally choosing that differentiates you from those around you than something that homogenizes you.
Interesting. Well,
and of course, I could have completely misread that study.
No, that makes a lot of sense. You would assume this is a lifelong journey, right? Leadership is a lifelong journey, and we're, as we talk about this podcast, I mean, leadership. I strongly believe everybody's a leader because everybody has influence, and so if you decide to continually grow as a person, then you're going to be stronger in your guiding principles. You're going to understand those more and more. And so if you want more about that, read Roberta Gilbert. She's got a lot of great books about guiding principles. And as you do that, things are going to be a bit clearer. So I can even see that in my life where I was like, man, maybe I need to go to a new church. And I started looking at denominations. And then when I started looking at denominations, I started identifying churches that would probably be best for me instead of just going to wherever. And it solidified some things for me. Not that I was stepping out of a certain religion to a different one, but I can understand that from that point.
Yeah, as C.S. Lewis says, you're going back into the hallway and you're picking a different room, but the room is where your home is.
Yeah. So to wrap this thing up, do you have anything else that looks like you want to add something?
Yeah. So wrapping that up, it just seems to me, if we're to return to this original question, this replacing the word maturity with self-differentiation, is there a relationship between commitment and self-differentiation? I would say that when you have found a commitment or that is in line with the convictions, that's resultant from your convictions, it's going to take you a lot more to abandon that. The measure of what adversities you have to face to ask you to abandon that is going to be much greater than if you were, say, a part of something that had no relationship to something that which you feel strongly about, something that doesn't guide your life, which sounds very intuitive, sounds, common sense, like why even say it? But
Yeah, I mean, I take the flip side of that which is adopted with pressure can be changed with pressure. And that's the words of Roberta Gilbert about guiding principles versus making a decision based on conviction and saying, this is what I'm going to do and this is what I'm about as a person. It doesn't mean you never change your mind, but the changing of the mind is not based on the pressure of others, but based on newfound wisdom that comes from study and conversations with people.
Yeah, it's almost like a commitment then to being more self-differentiated. It's a commitment to self-growth through being more self-differentiated.
yeah, the measures are internal rather than external.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So clearly, obviously, millennials are trying to be more mature, and so they're making less commitments, right? I think that's what we came down to.
Yeah, sure. We're bringing millennials
John, what do you
into
think?
this. Yeah.
I would agree wholeheartedly.
So hopefully that answered that question.
So now that we pressured John into agreeing with us.
Yes.
I just agreed to, by the way.
On his evolutionary basis, he was just reacting to the environment. So he just said yes.
I think genetically he's weaker than us, and we can all conclude that. Wouldn't you agree, John?
I would agree that we are more powerful than we ever dare to imagine,
And
are more fearful than anything we could ever be. That was a quote from Maya Angelou Williamson.
A woefully incomplete quote.
That was so incomplete and backwards. I loved how backwards that was. I don't even know what you said, but
Yeah.
my eyes are watered down because I'm so touched. So let's wrap this thing up. Thank you to Jesse Huffstetler for the wonderful.
Yeah. We're finally doing show notes, so check out below our thank yous and how you can reach us. How can they reach us, Alex?
It's theofpodcast@gmail.com. That is theofpodcast@gmail.com. Send us any questions you have, any thoughts, and maybe an e-card saying thank you.
We'll be throwing the research studies that I blasted in your faces below, so check that out in the show notes. Also, if you like Jetler or Jesse Huffstetler, the music at the beginning or the end, you can check out 2 of his other projects down below.
Roberta M. Gilbert, she has lots of books out. One, particularly Extraordinary Leadership. There's others, Cornerstone Concept, or
Extraordinary Relationships.
Yes, those are all fine books by Roberta Gilbert, MD.
And thanks to the Starfish Limiter, doing something really important.
It's super important. Just stretching out his little arms out there.
Something about those up downs and less of them or more of them. I don't really know. Do you know?
I do not know.
Yeah.
So, other than that, check us out on YouTube, Google Play, iTunes, and we will check you out on the flip side. We'll see you soon. I'm Alex, and I'm uncommitted.
I am John.
And I'm Zach. So peace out. We're off.
I'll see ya.